All right, guys, so today we're going to talk about steps to graphing in a quadratic equation. So this is day 2 of our quadratic stuff. Excuse me. So you want to make sure that you've already watched the previous video or you were in class and you know how to do the other previous work, which is the axis of symmetry. So in order to graph a quadratic equation, we have these steps, these 4 steps here. So first, we're going to find the axis of symmetry. Remember, axis of symmetry formula is negative b over 2a. All right, and then we're going to find the vertex. We do that by first finding the axis of symmetry, taking that answer and plugging it in to the equation for x and finding y. So that will give us our x and y of our vertex. We're going to put the vertex in the middle row of the table and then fill in the other values and then plot and connect. All right, so simple enough. Let's go through a couple examples. So number 1, we have y equals x squared. So over here to the side, like we did before, I'm just going to kind of write out my a, my b, and my c. So my a is 1, my b is 0, and my c is 0. So when we do our axis of symmetry, negative b over 2a, so we have 0 over 2 times 1. Now, anytime we're missing the b value, or the b value is 0, you're always going to have a 0 on top here. And anytime you have a 0 on top, 0 divided by anything is always going to be 0. So we know that if we are missing our b value, then our axis of symmetry is always x equals 0, which then means the x coordinate of our vertex is 0. So to find the y coordinate of our vertex, we're going to take 0 and we're going to plug it back into our original equation. So I have y equals 0 squared, which is just 0. So my vertex is at 0, 0. Now, when we're going to the table, we always want to put our vertex right here in the middle. So we're going to put 0 and 0 right there. So we have to think of numbers to put in our x. We got to come up with numbers. And so the easiest way to do that is to think of numbers that surround the number 0 on a number line. So if we have a number line, so here's my number line, and I have 0 right here smack dab in the middle, I want to think about the 2 numbers that are to the left of 0 and then the 2 numbers that are to the right of 0. And those are the numbers I'm going to use to fill in my x column. So if I go to the left, right, that's going to this way. If I go to the left, we'd be at negative 1 and then negative 2. And if I start at 0 and I move to the right, I'd be at positive 1 and positive 2. All right, so we always want to make sure our points are surrounding our vertex. Okay, so then to find the y coordinates of each of those points. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this number and we are going to plug it into the equation in order to find what our y is. Okay, so it's going to kind of look like this. We're going to do negative 2 squared. So negative 2 squared is going to give me 4, so my y here is 4. Now, this work that I'm writing out over here in pink, you can do that on your calculator. I'm just kind of writing it out so you can see what I'm doing, but you can do that on your calculator. All right, so then we now need to plug in negative 1. So if I do that, I have negative 1 squared, which is going to give me 1. All right, we jump down here to the bottom. We have the number 1, so I'm going to plug that in. So if I have 1 squared, that's going to give me 1. And then if I do 2 squared, that's going to give me 4. Now, take a second, and I want you to take a look at your table, specifically the y column. What do you notice about the y column? All right, hopefully you notice that this value and this value are the exact same. So on either side of the vertex, we have the exact same y value. And then if we extend that out, you can see 4 and 4. These are the same. And guess what? If I were to make my table even bigger, on either side of those would also be the same number. And the reason this is because quadratics are mirror images, has a mirror image of itself, right? It's symmetrical. So if we look over here, we have a quadratic, right? We have a parabola. My axis of symmetry cuts it right down the middle. That means that the 2 sides are mirror images of each other. So if this is my vertex, if this is one point to the left, then this is the point to the right. These are on the same level or the same y value. So they're mirror images of each other. So this point and this point are going to mirror each other. they're at the same level. They're going to have the same y coordinates. All right, so over here, these are always going to have the same, and these are always going to have the same y coordinates. All right, so when we're finding our y values, we're not actually going to have to plug in 4 different numbers. We're only going to have to do 2, and then we'll be able to find all of the points. All right, I'll explain that a little bit more on the next example, but let's finish this one. So we have 5 coordinate points, and we need to plot those points. So -2, 4 is here, -1, 1, 0, 0, and then this is a mirror image, so I'm just kind of going over to the right one and then up until I'm at the same level as the other points. And so now when we connect this, we have to make sure that down here at the vertex that it's not a point, that it's going to be curved. So we want to try to make this as curved as possible down here. So this area down here is what I'm referring to. We want this to be curved. We do not want it to be a point. All right, so I don't want my graph to look like that. All right, because if it's a V, then that means that it's absolute value and not a quadratic. All right, so we got to make sure that this part down here is curved. All right, so this was a really basic one since we only had x squared. We didn't have a b term and we didn't have a c term. So let's take a look at one that does have those terms in it. All right, so I'm going to start off by writing my a is 1, b is 2, and c is -1. So we start off by finding our axis of symmetry. Back up here, our first step, find the axis of symmetry. So I'm going to do -b over 2a. So this is going to be -2 over 2 times 1. So -2 over 2, which is going to give me -1. So my axis of symmetry is at x equals -1, which means the x coordinate of my vertex is -1, and then it's going to go in the middle of my table. So I'm just kind of filling out all the pieces that I can. All right, to find the y value of our vertex, we're going to take -1 and we're going to plug it in to this equation where we see an x. Now, this work, again, can be done on your calculator. I'm showing it, writing it down so you can see how you should be putting it into your calculator. So it would look like this, -1, all of that in parentheses with the squared on the outside, plus 2 parentheses -1, and then -1. Remember, we want to put whatever value we're putting in for x in parentheses, all right? And notice that the square's on the outside of the parentheses, not the inside. So only the number I'm substituting in gets put in parentheses. So if you type this into your calculator like this, you're guaranteed to get the correct answer. So on this one, we have -1, we plug it in, and then we're going to get -2 for our y value. All right, so my vertex is at -1, -2. All right, now that we have our vertex, we want the 2 points on either side of the vertex. So we think of -1 on a number line, and we want to go 2 points to the left and 2 points to the right. So if I'm at -1 and I go to the left one, that'd be at -2, and if I go again, I'd be at -3. Now, if we start at -1 and I move to the right, I'd then be at 0, and I move one more time and I would be at 1. Okay, so now we are going to plug these numbers in, but we found on the last one that this value and this value that I just highlighted yellow are going to be the same, and then this value and this value are going to be the same. And that's just the rule of the parabola, because the parabola is symmetrical and the two sides are going to mirror each other. All right, so when I'm looking at my values, I only need to either put in 0 and 1, or I'm going to do -3 and -2. So if I'm looking at this, I don't want to deal with negatives. Quite frankly, I don't like dealing with negatives. So I'm going to plug in 0 and then plug in 1, and then I can fill in these 2 spots up here with the same numbers. So I'm going to plug in 0 first. All right, so if I plug in 0, I have 0 squared plus 2 times 0 minus 1. Again, writing this down so you guys can see what I'm doing, but you can definitely just enter that into your calculator. So we would get -1. And since that's -1, we also know that -2 for x would also produce a -1 for y. All right, now I have to plug in 1. So I have 1 squared plus 2 times 1 and then minus 1. So if I plug that in, I end up getting 2 as an answer. And so then I also know that the 2 will match up there. Okay, so by plugging in just these 2 points here, I was able to fill out the rest of my table. All right, so we didn't have to plug in the -3 and the -2 because we already knew what those answers were going to be because we plugged in the 0 and the 1, and these are going to mirror each other. All right, okay, so now we got our 5 points. We're going to plot them and connect them and make a curve. Oh, here we go. So -3, 2, -2, -1. -1, -2, and then these will mirror each other. And again, making this a curve as much as possible. Just as long as it's not a V, like a strict V, then you should be good. All right? Okay, there's another example. Let's do one more. All right, if we look at number 3, my A value is -1, my B value is -8, and my C value is -17. So we're going to start off with axis of symmetry. So to do that, we have -b over 2a. Now, be careful on this because our b value is already negative, right? So when we put this in, this is the negative that goes from the formula, right? And then we have the negative that is also with the number 8 because that's what our b value is. And then we have this 2 times -1. All right, what happens when we have a -8? What happens to the two negatives? Yep, that's right. They turn positive. And then on the bottom, 2 times -1 is -2. So 8 divided by -2 is -4. So my axis of symmetry is at x equals -4. My vertex starts at -4, and I put -4 here in the middle. All right, so now we need to find the y-coordinate of our vertex. To do that, we're going to plug -4 back into our equation wherever we see an x. Now, this one's a little tricky. So notice that your original equation has a negative out here in front of the x. We still have to have that. And that's going to be outside the parentheses. So this is what it's going to look like. Negative parentheses, -4 squared minus 8 parentheses -4 and then minus 17. Also notice that the only thing going inside the parentheses is the number that I'm substituting in for x. All right, so this negative sign stays on the outside. So if you plug that directly into your calculator exactly how I have it written right here, you would get -1 for your y value. All right, so now we need to fill out the rest of our table. So remember, if -4 is here in the middle, we got to go 2 to the left and 2 to the right. So if I go to the left, I have -5 and -6. And if I go to the right, -3 and -2. Now remember what we said, these values are going to be the same, and then these y values are going to be the same. So I only have to input 2 of the numbers in order to figure out all of these points. So I'm going to just do -3 and -2, just a preference. I don't know, I just picked those numbers. You could have picked -6 and you can plug in -5. It doesn't matter. All right, so when we're plugging this in, I have -3 squared minus 8 times -3 and minus 17. So take a second, and if you need to pause the video, go ahead and put that into your calculator exactly how I have it written and see what you get. All right, hopefully you put that into your calculator and you were able to get -2. And since that one's -2, we also know that one is going to be -2 because these are going to match. All right, now I'm going to plug in -2 into the equation. So I start with negative parentheses -2 squared minus 8 times -2 and then minus 17. So again, pause the video, go ahead and put that into your calculator and see if you can get the correct answer. All right, hopefully you had time to put that into your calculator. You should have gotten a -5 here and a -5 here. So now I'm going to go over here and I'm going to graph that. So -4, -1, let's see, -5, -2, -6, -5, and here we go. Again, trying to make sure I make a curve as much as I possibly can. And there we go. All right. So real quick, to recap what we did, I'm just going to write it over here. So the first step that we did is we found our axis of symmetry by doing -b/2a. Step 2 is that we plugged in this answer to find our y value of our vertex. All right, so we found the axis of symmetry. We plugged that back in to find the y value of our vertex. So step 1 and 2, we're finding vertex. Step 3, we fill in the rest of the x column, right, with our numbers 2 to the left and 2 to the right of the number in the middle, our vertex. Step 4, plug in 2 numbers to find our y values. And then step 5, we plot and connect. All right, so once we have our vertex, we're then going to fill in this x column, right? We'll fill in the rest of this by 2 above and 2 below. Or I'm sorry, with 2 to the left and 2 to the right. And then we'll choose 2 of them to find our y values, and then we know those y values are going to match up here at these 2 y values. All right, and then we plot, connect, and draw our graph. If you have any questions, please come see me, and I'll be happy